On this Saturday night, the calls for an inquiry into the mass shooting.
You cannot move forward, in my opinion, till you know the truth.
Did police ignore the warning signs as a killer stalked Nova Scotia? The first phase of getting back to business in Canada.
The provinces will have a lead role.
And the restrictions that remain. Plus, caring for care homes should the feds take over from the provinces. And grooming your locks in this pandemic lockdown.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin with the investigation into that mass killing in Nova Scotia. It's been 1 week since a lone gunman began a 13-hour murder spree that claimed the lives of 22 people. Police believe many of the victims were targeted, while others were randomly chosen. Their loved ones want answers and question whether a better warning system could have saved lives. Tonight, the RCMP and the province's independent watchdog are investigating. But as Elizabeth McSheffrey reports, there are growing calls for a public inquiry.
RCMP have provided a timeline of Nova Scotia's mass shooting, but so many questions remain unanswered. It's complicated by the fact that the killer isn't here to address them himself.
We need to think about the extent to which his motives, can be delineated. We need to think about what warning signs there may have been.
The pressure is on Nova Scotia's Premier to launch a public inquiry into Canada's worst mass shooting.
I've asked the Attorney General to look at what are the possibilities as he works with his national partners.
An inquiry could be ordered in-house by the Nova Scotia government, or the federal government could order one, as it did in the 2014 shooting in Moncton, New Brunswick, which left 3 RCMP officers dead and 2 injured.
Were the RCMP in Nova Scotia properly equipped, trained, and supervised? If not, it's possible there could be an investigation and possible charges. I mean, it's just another possibility.
Rhonda McClellan, who fears her friend was killed in the spree, says answers would help her heal.
It's good to know, so you cannot move forward, in my opinion, till you know the truth.
The house of Joanne Thomas and husband John Zoll was set on fire during the shooting. The couple has not been heard from since. An inquiry can't technically assign blame, but it would make recommendations. And there will never be a trial for Gabriel Wortman because he was killed. For now, the investigation into this horrific chapter in Nova Scotia's history is in the hands of the province's police watchdog. Elizabeth McSheffrey, Global News, Halifax.
To the COVID-19 crisis, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has spoken with provincial and territorial leaders about plans for the eventual reopening of the economy. The 2 levels of government have agreed to develop guidelines to balance national coordination with flexibility for provinces to move at their own pace. Here's our chief political correspondent, David Akin.
At his daily press conference Saturday, the Prime Minister said he'll leave it to the premiers to set the timeline for any easing of COVID-19 restrictions.
The provinces will have a lead role in determining how their economies will reopen.
What we are doing.
And some are already moving. On Thursday, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe announced his province's 5-phase plan to reopen. He was followed Friday by New Brunswick's Blaine Higgs. Their plans will, for example, allow golf courses to open this spring. Provincial parks will also reopen. But in all cases, social distancing rules will remain in effect, as will restrictions on visiting seniors' homes. Next week, Quebec Premier François Legault and Ontario Premier Doug Ford will outline their plans.
There's no one that wants to open up the economy more than I do and everyone else, but we're going to do it responsibly. We're going to do it through the guidance of our Chief Medical Officer of Health.
Unlike in the United States, where President Donald Trump has clashed with state governors, the premiers and the Prime Minister have parked their partisan hats at the door.
Canadians can, take great comfort in the fact that all of our orders of government have been working together in a very strong and aligned way.
Provinces will be expected to demonstrate that before any reopening, there will be enough testing capacity and enough resources to trace the source of any new infections. Another emerging issue, making sure workers returning to the job have enough protective gear like shields and masks.
I don't think we should be talking about reopening any parts of the economy if we do not have a strong plan to protect people working there and prevent the spread of COVID-19.
The Prime Minister also warned that there is a great risk if a reopening happens too soon or if it is done poorly. Get it wrong, and that'll cost lives and could set back a province's recovery by months. Robin?
David Akin in Ottawa. Thanks, David. Canada has turned to China to buy much-needed personal protective equipment, or PPE, for healthcare workers. And the need is only increasing. But not all of the equipment coming in has been fit for use. In an interview with Mercedes Stephenson for the West Bloc, the head of NATO says member nations need to reconsider their reliance on importing medical equipment. Mercedes.
Robin, the Secretary General of NATO is warning that countries like Canada are too reliant on supply chains that they don't control for critical equipment like masks, gloves, and the medical equipment used to treat COVID-19, which are now coming primarily from China. In an interview with the West Bloc, Jens Stoltenberg said that NATO countries need to do more to make sure they have adequate national stockpiles when emergencies like the current pandemic strike.
I think we as NATO allies have to look into issues like stocks. Do we have enough stocks to deal with this kind of crisis? Are we too dependent on imports from countries outside the alliance? So one of the lessons we have to learn, some of the homework we have to do after this crisis, is to look into how to be less dependent on imports of these kind of essential equipment dealing with this kind of health crisis.
In recent months, Stoltenberg has warned that the West must address a rising China, which he says has been steadily investing in new military capabilities. Those concerns have been exacerbated by the current COVID-19 crisis, which has seen Canada and other NATO countries scrambling to buy masks and other desperately needed equipment from China when their own national stockpiles have fallen short. A significant amount of that equipment that has been procured from China has in fact been faulty. Tomorrow on the West Bloc, the Secretary General will also talk about the disinformation campaign out there and how that's risking spreading COVID-19 further, as well as whether Canada's defense spending will take a hit as countries like Canada all around the world, and especially those in NATO, are plunged into debt with COVID-related spending. Robin?
Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. Frontline workers who are helping fight COVID-19 in Ontario are getting a raise. Today, Premier Doug Ford announced the province is thanking healthcare heroes by providing a temporary financial boost.
They will receive a $4 per hour pandemic pay premium for every hour of work they complete for the next 16 weeks. On top of that, those who work over 100 hours per month will receive a $250 bonus per month for up to $1,000 over the next 16 weeks.
More than 350,000 people are eligible for the pandemic premium. That includes those working in long-term care homes, emergency shelters, supportive housing, correctional facilities, as well as community care providers and some acute hospital staff. BC's government is going to relocate homeless people from densely populated encampments in Vancouver and Victoria to prevent the spread of COVID-19 among the marginalized populations. The government issued a public safety order for the camps to be emptied by early May. The people living there will be relocated to empty hotels and community centers in the two cities. The province's Minister of Social Development and Poverty Reduction warned the camps are at high risk for COVID-19 outbreaks because of the lack of space to practice physical distancing and limited access to hygiene facilities. Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced $62.5 million to support struggling seafood and fish processors. For weeks, the industry has been calling on the Liberal government to cast a financial lifeline to help with transportation costs, purchasing personal protective equipment, and to fund increased testing for workers who are often based in remote locations.
This funding will help ensure that they can safely continue their important work. We're giving more money to processors so that they can purchase personal protective equipment for workers, adapt to health protocols, and support other social distancing measures.
And here's a look at the COVID-19 picture across Canada. There are more than 45,000 confirmed cases in Canada, but that is just the number of people who have tested positive for the illness. Not everyone is tested. More than 2,500 people have died. The world is nearing another grim milestone. There are more than 2.9 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 globally, and more than 200,000 people have died. Spain has the second highest amount of COVID-19 cases in the world, with more than 220,000. And tonight, the UK has surpassed 20,000 deaths. But the country leading in cases is the United States. More than 950,000 Americans have tested positive for the virus. Over 54,000 have died from COVID-19. Despite the rise in cases and deaths, several U.S. states are now easing restrictions. Businesses are being allowed to reopen. But as Jennifer Johnson explains, many owners and consumers are reluctant to leave their homes.
State by state, city by city, a chaotic reopening of businesses across America. The governor of Texas is expected to issue his wide-ranging order Monday. But in Wichita Falls, Texas, officials jumped the gun, reopening all businesses Saturday morning, still requiring face masks and social distancing.
This order is not forcing businesses to open. This order is allowing businesses to open.
After Georgia started reopening several businesses Friday, Savannah's mayor pushed back and says he was threatened with racist emails.
Our common enemy is not each other. It is called COVID-19.
Georgia and other states ignoring federal guidelines, which require non-essential businesses to stay closed until there is a decline in the rate of COVID-19 infections for 14 days. Tony Roberts welcomed customers back to his barbershop after 6 long weeks, somewhat reluctantly.
I was baffled at the governor's announcement, I'll be honest, because there's still people dying and the numbers are still going up.
U.S. President Donald Trump staying unusually quiet. The president is facing criticism after comments about injecting disinfectants into the body as treatment for COVID-19. New York's Poison Control Center says it had to manage 30 cases of possible exposure to disinfectants after the president's words. At the White House, his economic advisor did talk with reporters, sounding the alarm again about America's growing unemployment rate.
Yeah, I think the president, all of us are very, very concerned that we've got this massive, massive shock to the economy that's completely unprecedented, and it's going to be a very heavy lift to get the economy going again.
But studies show the majority of Americans are still reluctant to leave their homes, and some business owners are not taking any chances.
I think the concern would be is if we open up too soon, then we find ourselves in a similar situation in a couple months.
Health experts continue to warn the rush to reopen could have deadly consequences. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Coming up, cutting off aid to conflict zones in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis.
Whenever I am going through difficult times, I ask God Almighty for help.
COVID-19 hasn't stopped celebrations for Ramadan, but the Islamic holy month does look a little different. Instead of attending large gatherings at mosques, Muslims across Canada are connecting online in what's being called virtual Ramadan. Those who observe this faith are now fasting and reflecting and sharing spiritual messages from the safety of their homes. For those living in conflict zones in the Middle East, getting vital aid is even more difficult in this pandemic. Just this week, roads to a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon were cut off after cases of COVID-19 were confirmed in the camp. As Crystal Goomansingh reports, aid agencies fear the youngest will suffer the most.
In conflict zones, aid agencies negotiate and plead to get food, medicine, and basic supplies to citizens. The pandemic has added another hurdle.
In a displacement camp with 60 or 70,000 people living in tents, highly densely populated, I don't know what we would do if the virus actually makes it to the camp.
A COVID-19 related death was recently reported in northeast Syria. With a 10-year-long war, the country is isolated, so that might provide some protection in terms of imported cases. But there's also a lack of testing. The World Health Organization has Syria with roughly 40 cases. Surrounding countries have hundreds or thousands.
They're saying, I don't know what to do with COVID. Like, I cannot escape a virus. Even if I'm in my tent, it may find me.
Fearing the virus, refugees who risk their lives to make it out are turning around, choosing instead to shelter in their old, often destroyed homes. Save the Children continues to work in Syria. It stopped bringing kids together for school, instead using online and radio. But that is a challenge in a war zone. Many aid agencies are sounding the alarm.
The Middle East for UNICEF was already the place where 50% of our global humanitarian action was taking place. We have 25 million children in the region in need of humanitarian assistance, so there was already a vulnerability. And now COVID-19 comes on top of that.
In Yemen, there are concerns over a 5-year-long war despite efforts to end the conflict in order to fight COVID-19. A ceasefire has been extended by 1 month, according to Saudi state TV. However, it's not known if Houthi fighters will accept it. There are fears about what will happen if the virus spreads to the battered country. UNICEF is appealing for $92 million to address the pandemic virus in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Sudan.
These people have nobody else to help them if they don't get help from the international community.
Children, the experts say, are the ones who suffer the most, and they have already endured too much. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
Still ahead, the Canadians keeping canines happy until they can fly home. Two Canadians in St. Lucia are staying on the island during this crisis, caring for dozens of rescue animals. Abigail Beeman introduces us to Help Paws and some of their COVID-19 challenges.
Come on, guys! These 8 puppies aren't supposed to be at the St. Lucia rescue anymore, booked on Air Canada flights to adoptive families in Canada at the end of March. Those flights cancelled at the last minute, 4 of the dogs already kennelled and at the airport. The Canadians who run Help Paws told to come back and pick them up.
A family in Toronto waiting for this dog. Their hearts are open to bringing this dog in, and instead it's not coming home. So for us, it's pretty devastating. Not only the work that gets involved, but now that this puppy is in a shelter for that much longer.
Normally, they fly dogs to Canada weekly. Now there's about 50 animals at the rescue.
Without being able to fly dogs home, we're not able to rescue any more dogs, and that's leaving much more animals in the streets that could be in our care.
And it's obviously super stressful for us because we want so badly to help the animals, but we can't. We're 2 people, and we don't have the resources. All of our money is now going to be having to go into our flight costs.
They've had some issues getting food, face medication shortages, rising costs, and fewer people to help. Whenever the dogs can leave, it may cost 3 times as much. Airlines charge by weight.
We're hoping that maybe Air Canada would give us the same cost that we would have paid back in March.
And they're asking for a refund for their paperwork. Air Canada hasn't offered anything, nor did it respond to Global News questions by deadline. In Ottawa, Nick Poulin and his partner wait patiently for their dog Jane to arrive.
It helped that we were sort of prepared at least a little bit for this this sort of uncertain waiting game. It's difficult, but we know that the animals are in good hands, and so that helps.
They get lots of photos of Jane as they wait. Amid their challenges, rising costs, and anxiety, Help Paws uses its social media to spread smiles.
Gordo did what? We know there's so many things going on in the world. Everyone's as stressed out as possible. So we don't really want to show as much of the stress that we go through. So we do try now to show a little more positivity and just lighthearted posts.
Keeping the dogs happy, these Canadians aren't going anywhere, making sure the pups stay safe during the struggle. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
Up next, sheer madness and stay-at-home haircuts. As we all adjust to this new normal, that includes getting used to life with no hair salons or barber shops. While some have the chops to cut hair, others are having a tough time. Mike Drolet looks at the great lengths some will go for a fresh look during this pandemic.
It's been so long since I've had a haircut, all this seems foreign to me. Paintbrushes and foil? Whatever happened to scissors?
So I was asked to do a story on COVID-19 haircuts. Nice. Great. So I looked to my friend Roy, who's giving his daughter a haircut.
Getting all the hair, even the stuff at the back.
He knows what he's doing. He's got nice hair. He's no longer a friend. So why don't we get to watching some hatchet jobs together, shall we?
For me, this guy is everything. He's terrified, either of his wife or the haircut or both, and it makes me happy. But far too much of what I found online made me ask why. Does this guy really need a haircut? And why is this man, who looks salon fresh, allowing his wife to give him a trim?
It's good that I've only had one glass of wine.
And there it is. It's probably the wine. Then there's this video. I was openly rooting for a disaster.
Lithium-ion trimmer.
And it's only partly because he can't pronounce lithium-ion.
So we might have messed up this part a little bit. It's not looking good.
No, it's not. And that's good. I expected more of the same until I found this guy. And I have to say, he's my hero. The man, after all, is using shears. Shears! And he does a pretty good job. There's no vanity here, just purpose. And I was at peace with it all. But who am I kidding? Fear of clippers is far more interesting.
That's laundry.
Get cut in Canada.
Does it hurt when Lindsay does it? No.
Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Saturday. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight we leave you with some of Canada's top dancers bringing the ballet to you. Lacking space but not passion, the National Ballet of Canada is still dancing, albeit in isolation. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. Good night.